for organizing us. And of course, Tanya is one of the technical assistance providers for CSEP. I think everyone on here knows what CSEP is at this point. And I appreciated it. They're implementation science implementation science specialist, right? That's the title that CSEP and NERN use. Is that right, Tanya?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But one of the states who was talking about their work with CSEP was calling them systems coaches. So they're really side by side with the state as they go through the major changes that it takes to build an infrastructure that supports implementation. So Tanya, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today. I know you've just got back off leave, you've had a busy schedule, and so we appreciate your time. And I do want to encourage everyone on the call to be comfortable jumping in with questions. This is a group that can use their phone because we're small enough for that. Of course, you can also use your chat pad to type questions in, but this should be a conversation. So thank you, Tanya, for being with us.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I'm glad to be here. Let me try again to share my screen. Can you see that PowerPoint?
Looks really good.
Okay, great. So I just want to echo what Jennifer said. Please, since we have such a small group, definitely jump in at any time. Feel free to use the chat or to just come off mute. I would love for this to be a conversation today. So I'm really excited to be here. Here's kind of some thoughts that I had for today's discussion. And again, don't hesitate to jump in at any time. But I thought we could start with just quickly reviewing the key aspects of an effective coaching system so that when we're talking about differentiation, we're putting it within an effective system. And then I'm going to talk about a database process to guide that differentiation. And then, as Jennifer mentioned last time, I sort of skimmed the surface of some coaching strategies that a variety of coaching strategies that can be used. And so today I was going to dive in a little bit more to specific strategies and when we might use them. So how do we really differentiate for people based on matching strategies to perhaps a coaching need or where they are in their implementation. So hopefully that sounds okay to folks. So we'll just get started with thinking about those key aspects. So when we think about coaching, we know that coaching for teachers needs to support their implementation of effective practices. And we must see improvement or changes in those practices in order to get the success for students that we're looking for. And so that's really where the focus of our instructional coaching or content coaching is for teachers, for staff, for interventionists who are implementing those effective practices or strategies. To get there, we also need coaching of teams that are developing the infrastructure to support, to provide the support that's needed for those teachers or the staff. So we also have systems coaches who help support teams as they're building that infrastructure, as they're building that system. So I'll talk about the strategies today, some of them specific to instructional or content coaching, some of them that go across instructional coaching and systems coaching, but we'll take a look at a variety of strategies. So I mentioned we'll start with the key components of a coaching system. So before we can even think about differentiating our coaching, we really want to make sure that we've designed a strong system for coaching to get us started. So here are some key aspects of a coaching system. It's really important that there's a definition of what coaching is or what coaching is intended to do in your settings. So whether that's, again, the systems coaching or instructional coaching, ensuring that we're selecting for coaches by looking at what knowledge is needed, what the responsibilities are, what some of those tough to teach traits are that coaches need. I've been in a lot of situations where a coach was selected simply because maybe they were a really strong classroom teacher, but maybe they prefer to work with children or students than adults. You never know. And so we really have to more carefully select perhaps than we have sometimes for who our coaches are. Ensuring that coaches have a toolbox of really strong evidence-based coaching strategies, and that we're documenting the coaching supports that are being used. And then, of course, evaluating our coaching supports and continuously improving them and providing professional learning for coaches. So one resource, and I'll be sure after the presentation that you have the PowerPoint as well as these resources available to you. I'll get those to Jennifer. But one resource that we have that you might want to take a look at is a coaching system checklist. So it goes through those various aspects of the strong coaching system that I mentioned and gives you an opportunity to self-assess. Where are you really strong with your coaching system, and where do you have some room for improvement of your coaching system, and then how can you action plan? So I'll be sure to get that to Jennifer as well. So once we have this strong coaching system, we should have supports in place so that coaches can do what they need to do to support teams, to support teachers. But too often in our schools, I have seen that we have coaches, but sometimes we don't have coaching happening. Or we have coaches, but we're not seeing the effects in change in practice in the classroom. So we're not necessarily seeing effective practices being implemented still at the classroom level. And sometimes we're not then getting to the outcomes that we're hoping the coaching would provide for students. So being able to improve those practices and then get results for students. So I want to know if anyone else has seen any of these besides just me. So have you seen coaches, but maybe some of these issues still occurring? You can put it in the chat or come off mute.
Or they could raise their hand.
Oh yeah, or raise your hand if you can.
Yep, just choose a little participant button at the bottom, and then the raise your hand option will come up.
Seeing yes, and coaches who are new to coaching struggle without some guidance, yes. Okay, so if we think about why this happens, so why do we see that we have coaches, but sometimes we still have these issues? If we think about coaching in general, we know that coaching has kind of gotten mixed results actually over the years. If you look at the literature research on coaching, it's very promising, but some of the reasons that we get mixed results are that we often have a failure to define that coaching upfront. So to really say, here's what coaching is, here's what coaching is not, here's what our coaching process is. I'm seeing a few more comments. A lot of instructional coaches are called coaches, but little time spent on coaching. They become administrators, absolutely. Sometimes coaches are given roles and responsibilities that are not coaching, absolutely. So that lack of clearly defining upfront what coaching is, and then leave it, and then as people have mentioned, sort of what happens is that coaches become administrators, or they go into other roles, or they revert back to what they're maybe most comfortable with if they don't have the guidance that someone mentioned. So maybe they're really comfortable with providing with teaching, and so they end up kind of going back to providing direct supports for students. So ensuring that we have that clear definition up front. Another reason that we sometimes have this issue with coaches, but not a lot of coaching happening, is that we don't have a clear coaching process, or coaching isn't intentional enough. So for example, if a systems coach is coaching a team, it can be difficult to sometimes not become part of the team. remembering that the intention of the coach being there is to build capacity. So sometimes we don't have that intentionality behind the coaching. Along those same lines, there are a lot of models that promote conversation and questioning as the main strategy for coaching. And we know that that can be really effective, but that coaching that is reflective alone doesn't necessarily lead to people being able to implement something new, for example. Oftentimes, coaching where teams are setting their own goals without data or through conversation, they'll select something that they already know how to do or something that's not going to be a high leverage strategy that will get a change. So that's often a concern or something that we see that creates these concerns. People mention pulling coaches to do other things or not evaluating the effectiveness of our coaching. And then the biggest, or one of the biggest ones that we're here to talk about today is not differentiating our coaching. So having kind of one size fits all coaching. And I appreciate for those of you who are typing in the chat. We had a couple more comments. A lack of clarity on exactly what to coach on. Yes, so not having a clear, usable practice or usable innovation or evidence-based practices that we are coaching around. So not having something to clearly coach around. So I just want you to think about why we need differentiated coaching supports then. So I've mentioned a few reasons. If there are any other reasons that people can think of why we need differentiated supports, be sure to put them in the chat. So I'll just keep going, but I'll keep monitoring the chat as well. So when we're thinking about differentiating coaching supports, this is kind of a guide that we use to help people as an initial place to start. So I mentioned that there are a lot of coaching models that focus heavily on reflection and conversation and questioning. And although there's a place for those within coaching, we have to differentiate that from coaching for implementation. So I think it was Tom who said we have to have exactly what we're coaching on. So we have to have, our coaching really should be helping us get something implemented initially. So when we are helping people develop their knowledge, their skills, their abilities around the it or the thing that we're coaching around, then we really should be spending about 60% of our time that we're coaching those folks specifically on doing that. So we should be focused on building skills. We should be using coaching strategies that will help build skills, build knowledge. And only about 20% of our time reflecting then on practice. And only 20% of the time providing any sort of personal support. We know that that often becomes a role of a coach, but it shouldn't be that coaches become therapists. So a small portion of time just helping provide that personal support to the folks who are receiving coaching. Once we have, we're working with people who are more experienced with the thing that they're implementing, they're becoming proficient at implementing it, that's when we can make that shift over to more reflective coaching. Still focused on developing knowledge and skills, but then being more reflective, looking at generalizing their knowledge and skills. But we can't just focus on reflection. I'm saying need differentiated supports because coaches have different areas of strength and different areas of need. Yes, yeah. So everyone who's implementing has different needs, different areas that they're strong in, and so absolutely that's a great reason for differentiating support. So here are some dimensions, and I did share this last time as well, but thought that it would be helpful as a review for those who were here and for those who were not here last time. There are a variety of ways that we can differentiate our coaching support. So we can think about the amount of coaching that we're providing, so the frequency that coaching is being provided, the duration of coaching sessions, whether or not coaching is done individually or for group, is another type of way that we can differentiate. Are differentiating by coaching goals. So having different goals or narrowing the focus for those who might have more of a need in a particular area. And then coaching goals that are focused more on knowledge, skill application as people are new with a practice, then to reflection as people are more proficient with implementation. The immediacy of coaching, so coaching in the moment versus coaching outside of classroom practice or outside of team meetings. And then finally, the coaching strategy, and this is really what we're going to focus on today, is how are we looking at a variety of strategies to differentiate our coaching and matching the strategy to why someone might benefit from coaching. So what is it that what strategy would best meet their need, or what strategy would best help them meet their goals? So the database process that I'm going to talk about today has 3 key components. So there are systematic coaching cycles, as is similar to many coaching processes. But then there's intentional differentiation of coaching supports using a variety of coaching strategies that are matched to analysis of implementation issues. So if we know why someone might not be implementing as planned, then we can help match a strategy to address that. So if we take a look at the actual coaching process, as I mentioned, it's very similar to most coaching processes that you may be using already or that you may have encountered. But we start with establishing that instructional focus, or if you're working with a team, what the goals are for that team. Back to, as Tom said, this is the it that we are coaching around. And then we're providing some initial training, professional learning on that thing. Our coaching should always be to follow up and help with implementation of the thing that we're trying to implement. Once we've provided that initial training or professional learning, then we would give people an opportunity to begin utilizing the practice or having their team meetings. And we would want to collect some data and use those data to help us guide either individual or group coaching cycles. And you can see here this sort of pop out on the right is then what that individual coaching cycle would look like. So within that individual coaching cycle, there's use of the data that we've been collecting to help us select from a variety of strategies to match the need in classroom or in meeting coaching. If we're truly going to do job-embedded coaching, then coaches should be spending about 80% of their time either in classrooms with teachers or in meetings with teams that they're working with around systems coaching. So really looking at how the coach time is being spent. We should be seeing the majority of it with the people who are being coached in the actual setting where they are implementing the practice or utilizing the strategies. So that would be in classroom or in team coaching. Then some debriefing and reflection from the in-classroom coaching, additional data collection to see how we did with our coaching that was provided, and then continuing to go through that cycle. So as I mentioned, it's very similar to probably other coaching models that you've seen, but really honing in on that variety of coaching strategies and matching them to meet to the need is what makes this a little bit different. So when we think about the coaching process in general, I'm going to kind of walk you through what this has looked like in a district that was using data-based coaching. So in this district, they established some indicators for practices that they wanted to see. So these were some effective instructional practices that they wanted to see happening in their classrooms. So they clearly defined those. And they developed indicators. So which one would they start with? They prioritized. And then they said, what percentage of our teachers will we expect to be using this practice in the first quarter after receiving professional learning or in the second quarter. So they set some upfront expectations, provided professional learning, and then completed some observations to give them some data on how well the professional learning had worked for people to begin implementing, or to help identify where there were some needs for follow-up coaching. You'll see here that in this district, they had both a fidelity check or an observation to look at all of those practices, but then they had targeted ones for each of the individual practices so that they could really hone in if they wanted to just focus on one practice before moving on to another practice. In addition to instructional coaching, you can also use observation data from team meetings to help support a coordinator of a team or a team facilitator if we're providing some systems coaching, or the whole team themselves. So this is a resource, again, that I'll share with you of what would we be seeing in an effective team meeting. So what would we be looking for? Because then we can use this also to help guide our coaching, kind of that fidelity observation of team supports. So back to our instructional data or our instructional coaching example. This is some data from their initial observation that helped them kind of hone in on two areas that they wanted to provide some additional support. In this district, they used data to help them do their first differentiation, which was, will we need to do group coaching or will we need individual coaching? These are guidelines that this district used. Districts might select their own guidelines, but this district said, if we do observations and we see that more than 30% of our teachers need support, then we're going to be sure that we're providing group coaching for our teachers. So we're going to bring them together. We might do some co-planning if that's what we see is needed. We might do some practice sessions if that's what we see is needed. But they would provide group coaching, but then also consider individual coaching. So if they had fewer than 30% of the teachers, then they might do all individual coaching. But they might do group coaching, but then also individual coaching with each of the teachers. And then to further...
Sonia, can I ask you a question real quick, Jennifer?
Yeah.
So for the group coaching, I think it matters. When would you think, because we talk, of course, about how data from the training should go to the coaches, and data from coaches should go back to trainers. So when would you decide that you actually need to retrain as opposed to do a group coaching situation here?
Oh, great question. So one of the guidelines is if there are multiple areas in which, in this example, more than 30% of the teachers needed support. So if you had multiple areas, that's when you might go back and do full retraining, go through the professional learning again. Oftentimes, though, what we find is that too much was covered in the initial professional learning or the initial training. And so it may not necessarily be retraining that's needed. It may be breaking down what was in the training and rolling it out slowly. So that's actually one of the things that we found ends up often being more effective than full retraining, depending on how many strategies were shared in the training or how complicated it was that people were trained in. Does that help?
That's really helpful. And I would guess too, what you would do, the coach would then connect with the trainer and say, this is an area where maybe more application is needed during the training session, or maybe it's something that you could have an exit assessment on to make sure that people are getting it. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if you were to, following a training session, if you were to do observations and the majority of people looked like they needed, some more significant coaching, then yes, that data should go back to your trainers to say, was there something about the training that we might want to adjust or do something differently. So maybe we didn't have enough practice within the training itself for people prior to them having to try to use something outside the training. So it can absolutely, as you said, inform the training as well.
And did you see the chat pod, Sonia, too, while we're still on my side note?
I'm sorry?
There was something in the chat pod related to what we were just saying.
Yes. So couldn't training and group coaching be considered the same thing? And it's just semantics, because sometimes the type of learning is more effective with group coaching versus the training. Yes, absolutely. So you could be doing kind of a booster session after a training, which would just be bringing people together for another training or follow-up training. Co-planning and preparation is something that you might do with a group as well. And then someone says, yes, sometimes we provide too much for people to absorb in a training. Absolutely. Okay. So when we're thinking then about what that individual coaching looks like, though, so if we move from group to thinking about individual, the cycle for individual coaching really is identifying what that goal would be, or if it's an implementation issue, what that implementation issue is. Looking for potential strategies that would address why that implementation issue is occurring or that would help someone reach their goal, and then engaging in the coaching cycle. And this is just a reminder of that coaching cycle. This speaks a little bit to what you were talking about, Jennifer, that whether an individual might need retraining in something is if you were to see multiple areas that they need support in. If people have just an area or two, then we might analyze those issues, prioritize them, and coach. And then there will be some people who will just need minor tweaks. And so that's, we would differentiate the type of strategy that we would use in that case as well. So when we're thinking about targets for our coaching support, this is kind of a guideline that, that we tend to follow, which is we would start with either if there were any issues with classroom management. So if we were using instructional coaching, coaching teachers, if there were any issues with classroom management, kind of starting there. And then the same goes for teams. I'm not saying that the teams are difficult to manage, but some teams might have some behavioral issues, but the basic teaming roles, basic teaming functioning might be a place to start if we're systems coaching. And then taking a look at, are there any issues with preparation and planning, either for instruction or for meetings? So because if the issue is with preparation and planning, we need to work on that, help provide some coaching around that before we're actually looking then at the delivery of instruction or the actual meeting facilitation. So making sure there's not a preparation and planning issue first, and then looking at actual delivery of the strategies or facilitation of a meeting. Any questions or thoughts so far? I feel like I'm talking a lot, and we said we wanted this to be interactive. No. Okay. So here are some strategies, and we're going to dig into some of these today. These are a variety of strategies. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some techniques that it really would be helpful for coaches to have and to be very proficient in. And we can't just assume that everybody knows all of these strategies and how to use them and when to use them. So support for coaches, professional learning for coaches, coaching for coaches in use of these strategies is really important for them to be successful. So you'll see, and again, you'll receive this resource as well. There's a variety of strategies, and then what those are. I won't go over them here because I'm going to talk about a lot of these in just a little bit. And then the next piece, and this is where the differentiation comes in, a differentiation of strategies, is how do we then match some of those strategies to the need? So why someone could benefit from coaching. So you'll see here a variety of strategies you might use if someone is newly received training, If someone has um, an actual skill need, so they're having difficulty with implementing something, what kind of strategies might be helpful. Sometimes we have people who don't actually believe that what they're doing is going to work. And so that would, again, require a different type of strategy, perhaps, than someone who has a skill need. So we have to really begin to analyze why people might be having implementation issues and match our strategies to it. We can't just use the same strategy over and over again. In the presentation last time, I gave that example actually of a district that had taken a look at their coaching log data, and they found that there were a lot of teachers that, even though they were receiving coaching, they were still showing up on observations as continuing to need coaching support in the same focus area. Then they looked at the coaching strategies being used and realized that the coaches were overusing observation and feedback. And observation and feedback isn't going to be the most useful strategy if it's a skill need. If someone needs practice with something, just observing and providing feedback isn't going to necessarily help build capacity or build their skill. So that, was an example of an overuse of a strategy that wasn't working, and they had to actually look at providing support for their coaches to use other strategies. Within this coaching cycle, as with all coaching cycles, there is then some sort of debriefing, reflection that follows the in-classroom or in-team meeting coaching support. And we have, protocols that we help provide support for coaches in doing that debriefing and that reflection. So I want you to just think for a moment, what are some similarities between what I've just talked about with database coaching to your own coaching process? Or are there any ideas in here that you might consider using in your coaching process? You can come off mute if it's too much to type in the chat.
Hi, this is Ellen Reinhardt. Am I off mute?
Yes.
Okay.
You are.
I'm horrible in the chat. I always make errors. So I really loved what you just showed about, that hypothesis about if this is the need, consider this strategy, because I think we all go back to what we're good at. And so our skills as coaches don't necessarily expand more because we go, home to what we've always used in the past or used most successfully. And that's really going to be helpful for me. I was like taking screenshots as you were having that up. So.
Oh, great, thanks. And you'll be able to access this too, Ellen. So
I know, but I have trouble waiting for things. So yes, I will access it that way too.
And to your point, I think, so not only do we tend to kind of revert back to things that we've always done or things we're most comfortable with, but I think oftentimes we're not providing enough professional learning and coaching for our coaches to get really confident in use of these other strategies. So I think that that's another piece to what you were saying as well.
It absolutely is. Thanks.
Cheryl says, I think we expect our coaches to follow these best practices, but I'm not sure we explicitly train. Yeah, exactly. Explicitly train them to use these. Absolutely. I think that we don't recognize that although we know coaching is a driver of implementation, it's really important. We don't recognize that coaching itself is it is an innovation that we have to provide professional learning and coaching around and support for our coaches. So thank you. So I want to spend just a little bit of time going through some of these strategies more specifically so that you can get a better picture of what some of them are and when we might use them. So when we're thinking about preparation and planning as an initial strategy, this can apply for instructional coaching or for systems coaching. So if it's preparation, helping teachers think about what they're going to teach, for systems coaching, helping teams or team facilitators, team coordinators think about what we're going to accomplish in a meeting. What's the goal of our meeting? And then the planning is how they're going to teach it or how they're going to facilitate a team to accomplish those goals. So there are times when we really haven't even thought about the preparation or the planning that needs to go into something, and we don't recognize that people often need coaching around how to do that before we actually even get into the delivery or the facilitation. So I wanted to give you another chance to just think about what do you see in your work? And if you work more with instructional coaches or systems coaches, you can answer this either way. But what do you see often that suggests that a teacher or a team may need some support with preparation or planning? We have a few more comments in the chat. Trying to have coaches use data more, define their support for teachers and teams. Use a lot of tools from Elena Aguilar that help the coaches understand. Great. Provided coaches some of the dosage tips we provided in the last session. We found it to be useful. Oh, great. That's nice to know that they had another tool in their toolbox. So any thoughts on what you might see that would suggest that a team or teacher might need some assistance with preparation or planning? Okay, Marty says, I think this is an area not considered. In many situations, assumptions are made that may be incorrect. This is not part of the system. I would agree. I think a lot of times we skip over thinking about the preparation and planning to do the things that we're looking for people to implement or facilitate. Okay, so here are some, you've got some thoughts. Here are some thoughts that, that we had on it may be a preparation or planning issue if you see some of these things. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but if you see teachers maybe over relying on materials that they have or kind of struggling with material management during a lesson, sometimes we'll see incorrect content presented incorrectly, a really slow pace of the instruction. Some of these can potentially be signs of a planning or preparation issue. And it might, someone might benefit from some upfront help with figuring out how to prepare for a lesson or plan. You might, for a team, see slow pacing of a meeting. You might have a lack of an agenda or an agenda that isn't well formulated. Or you might have tasks or activities listed, but no plan for how we're going to get there. What facilitation techniques will we use to accomplish those tasks or activities? And then it looks like Cheryl added, we often see a lack of progress in team meetings if their meetings are poorly planned or conducted. Yes, so you'll often see that teams aren't meeting their goals if they don't have really tight, well-planned meetings. So again, if you're seeing some of these things, it might be, or if coaches are seeing some of these things, you might want to step back and say, wait a minute, do we need to actually do some upfront planning and preparation support, coaching people around that? Another coaching strategy, or as someone mentioned earlier, this could also be considered training, just semantics, would be some mini sessions. So if you were to, and mini sessions really would be when the majority of staff need support in something, pulling people together, providing that booster session or booster training. When you might consider this is if you were to, in your observation data, see that the majority of teachers were not getting something or were not able to implement something well. That's often not going to be an individual teacher to teacher issue, so you wouldn't necessarily look at other strategies. This is most often going to suggest something in our training wasn't successful. And so a mini session where we change up our training, we provide additional practice, we provide opportunities for feedback within that session, would be a best match perhaps, because if it's a majority of teachers, it's likely not an individual teacher thing. It's likely we need to bring that group together for a mini session. I'm going to go through, I have this really bad habit of always putting too much into something and not having time. So I'll go through the next few pretty quickly so that we'll have some time for more question and conversation at the end. So demonstrations are another coaching strategy a lot of people are familiar with. A few sort of guidelines for those are that really coaches shouldn't be demonstrating a full lesson. It should just be a portion of the lesson that relates to whatever the coaching focus is, whatever it is that the individual or the group is working on. For systems coaching, again, it also wouldn't be a full meeting, but there might be a particular strategy or data analysis technique that a coach might demonstrate for, or facilitation technique that a coach might demonstrate. When we're thinking about when to consider a demonstration, if there's a new strategy or a new routine or a brand new behavior management technique for a teacher, or a new decision-making protocol, some sort of new data analysis for a team, it's always good when there's something new to provide that initial model, that initial demonstration. And then once people have been implementing, if you see some implementation issues, so if you see lesson pacing type issues, if it's instructional coaching, or a belief issue, someone doesn't really believe that what they're doing can work for their students, a demonstration might help because it can be demonstrated that yes, this can work with your students. If there are team facilitation issues, so if someone is having a lot of tangents during a meeting, distractions, demonstrating some facilitation techniques can be helpful. So again, this is thinking about when you might actually use demonstration. This is just an example of systems coaching where demonstration is built in, because I mentioned our coaching also needs to be really intentional, remembering that we're there to build capacity. So this is an example of an intervention data review meeting and the type of coaching that builds in demonstration before then the team would do it themselves. One of the things about demonstration, or a few things about demonstration, is oftentimes these are some pitfalls that I see, is that someone will be demonstrating and the person they're demonstrating for will just leave. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, but I've seen this happen many times. And so making sure that coaches know to just stop if you're demonstrating something and the person leaves. Leaving it open during a demonstration where people don't know the people who are observing don't know what to focus in on or hone in on. So we have to make sure that during demonstrations, the teacher or the team is looking for something specific in the demonstration related to the focus area, related to what they're being coached around. Not having such fancy demonstrations that the teacher or the team facilitator could never measure up to that. So making sure that it's just a normal, typical demonstration. And then this is probably one of the biggest ones, is that a lot of people will just keep asking coaches to demonstrate over and over and over again. And in this case, the coach is really doing all the work, and the person who's being coached is never actually getting that opportunity to practice with other types of coaching, with feedback being provided or that type of thing. So thinking about some of these pitfalls and trying to prevent some of those. Shadow or mirror coaching, I'll go through this really quickly, but this is typically used in instructional coaching where the coach will teach a very small portion of something and then the teacher teaches exactly the same thing. This is one of the most intensive types of coaching support. So in thinking of differentiation, we would be cautious with how frequently this is used or how yeah, how frequently this is used with someone, because it is teach a little bit, then the teacher does it, teach a little bit more, the teacher does it. Sometimes you might want to consider that, though, is if someone has had to receive some retraining, so they had many areas they were needed some support with, might be a good time to do that shadow or mirror coaching. This really is most beneficial if there's a skill need. So we wouldn't really use it if there's not a skill need, or if there's some sort of issue with knowledge of the content, then that can be helpful as well. Again, being careful though that the person stays there, again, not razzle dazzling, and not doing too much at one time. Also, if it's too challenging for someone, practicing first outside of the classroom prior to doing the shadow or mirror coaching within the classroom. And then the last strategy that I'll talk about really quickly before we have more time for thoughts and questions is side-by-side coaching. So side-by-side coaching is, as most of you probably are really familiar with, the coach is actually sitting beside the teacher or sitting beside whoever the team leader is, or team coordinator, facilitator. And the purpose of this really is for that immediacy of coaching. So you'll remember earlier on, I talked about one of the ways we can differentiate is how immediate our feedback is, how immediate our support is. So when we're thinking about this type of coaching, this is in the moment, providing that immediate feedback, oftentimes then followed by some sort of model with, so providing that feedback, a suggestion for what the teacher might do or what the team facilitator might do. Oftentimes side-by-side will include then a model of what that looks like, and then turning it back over to the teacher or the team facilitator for an opportunity to practice and get some additional feedback. When people are using this type of side-by-side coaching, often teacher might not make it through whatever was planned for that day's lesson, or a team might not make it through all of their agenda items. But again, the idea is if we're intentional about our coaching and we're building that capacity, we should be improving it for the future. So it's okay that they don't make it through that thing at that time. Side-by-side can look like just whispering feedback. It can look like, again, pausing, offering a suggestion, modeling, and then providing that practice. And when you may consider, this one is if people have just received training. If someone wants some backup support. So I've had people ask, can you just come and be here side-by-side as I'm doing this? And then you're kind of in it together, and they have that backup support. If there's a skill issue, or also if there's low expectations or belief issue, you can use this one as well, because again, you're doing it in the moment and perhaps providing some modeling in the moment. Some of the pitfalls with side-by-side are that oftentimes not using it as the first strategy if someone is a little hesitant of coaching. They may not necessarily want the side-by-side with the interruption or the pausing, maybe a side-by-side with some feedback, but being sure that that's worked out with the teacher, what the strategies are that would be used. Not overwhelming people with too many suggestions in a side-by-side session, so not interrupting too many times, really focusing, and just being cautious of how others are viewing that side-by-side coaching and making sure that you're clear up front about it. The last one is using video, which a lot of people do. Video does provide an opportunity for self-reflection, or an opportunity to observe someone else, see another model, or an opportunity to view their students or to view their team while they're working with their team or while they're working with their students. Times to consider this are in particular if someone is not aware that they have an issue. So if they're not aware of something that they're doing, use of video can be really helpful for people to watch themselves and see that, and then be able to make some improvements. For someone who's really skilled, video can help with reflecting for generalization, or help them come up with strategies to continuously improve. And it can help with problem solving as well. So if there is some sort of team issue, or perhaps student management issue, that it can be helpful for that as well. And then the pitfalls here are not relying on video for all coaching supports. I think a lot of people learned how to use video, and then I saw people using video for everything. And again, if there is a skill issue, video is not going to improve that. Just watching yourself will not help you improve. A lot of times you need specific feedback to really help you improve, or a model to help you improve. Again, similar to observation or demonstration, is making sure that people, when they're watching their videos, have some sort of guidance or look-fors that they're using. A coach should also always be watching the videos that the people are watching themselves. And then the video debrief needs to lead to something actionable. It's not just watching the video for watching the video, but what actions will be taken following that. I didn't have a chance, obviously, to go through all of the different coaching strategies, but I want to just pause there and get your thoughts on, are there strategies that I mentioned that you are finding that your coaches are really doing a good job with? Are there strategies here that maybe people haven't been using and you'd like to get them thinking about using? So we'll do that before we talk about this example here.
While people are thinking, Tanya, made me think, this is so helpful in getting people off. I do all the time. It's, once you have a skill, you have a hammer, and everything you see seems to need the hammer. And
Right.
I find that I'll be reading some kind of leadership book or something similar to that. Everything that comes up is like, what they need is trust, and they may need other things as well. But you do have to kind of have the various skills available to you, or at least a list to look back at of the various skills to get beyond that single skill.
Right. Yeah. And we have to work with, to try to figure out what the issue is. I think of, I talk about beliefs, and I was working with a teacher and who was, had some implementation issues, and we were meeting and trying to work through them. And it wasn't until about the third time that we met that it finally came out that this person really did not believe that the student that he was supposed to be providing this intervention for was going to be able to change. And how you coach that is very different from how you coach someone who is really having a skill concern with what they're implementing. So we have to really think about why people might have implementation issues and match. Willingness, or do not feel that you have the support to address the elephant in the room, lack of leadership support. So are you talking about lack of leadership support for coaches? Whatever coaching duties, responsibilities, documents they're developed. Or, sorry, does anyone know of a scope and sequence for training, supporting coaches, or do most just go off whatever coaching duties, responsibilities, documents they've developed? I'll let others jump in, and then I can respond to that, Cheryl and Marty.
Hey, this is Carol in North Carolina. One of the things that I think that I'd like to get some of our coaches to do is having the teacher not just to use the video of themselves, but then do some data collection in between the time that they have had some coaching feedback to see if they can work on that themselves in between the coaching cycle visits.
Absolutely great idea, Carol. So anytime there's any sort of coaching happening, we should be collecting some sort of data. Whether that's the teacher collecting data, or the coach collecting data, or someone else collecting data, because it'll tell us if our coaching is working or not. So did it work for us to watch that video and come up with our strategy and then implement our strategy? Did it work for us to do the side-by-side coaching on that particular focus? So that's great is to have that data collection in between. Great idea. Yeah, so is there really support for coaching by leadership? Leadership support is incredibly important for coaches to be able to be successful. Otherwise, coaches will get pulled into doing other things, or you might have a lot of hesitancy from teachers if coaching is not just the culture of the building or the culture of the district. Buy-in from teacher, team, administration is critical for successful implementation. Yes, absolutely. It's not one of the strategies that I talked about today, but when I mentioned observation and feedback earlier, that's probably the most commonly used coaching strategy, is observing teachers and providing feedback. It's also a strategy that, when used a lot, can create so-called resistance from teachers, because then they feel like it becomes much more evaluative. It's not really, we're in this together and you're providing coaching support. And I think that is critical, in particular in places where the leadership may not be as supportive of coaching, is that the coaches are doing even more, as much as possible in classroom, right there with the teachers, and it doesn't become an evaluative kind of observation feedback. Okay, so I'm looking, we actually are out of time to do these. So when you get this presentation, take a look at these next couple of slides that have some scenarios on them, and think about what kind of strategies you might use. And there's no one correct answer for this strategy is going to match this thing that's happening, but I'm just trying to get you thinking about how can we begin to do a little bit more of differentiation and matching of our strategies. So you might want to take a look at these, maybe look at these with some of your coaches, thinking about what strategy might we match to the different ideas or different thoughts that we have here. So just to kind of bring us back together, and then I can absolutely stay longer for questions or comments, but as you're thinking about supporting coaches, making sure they have the data they need, defining that coaching system, resources and tools, and then professional learning and coaching for coaches. So back to, I think it was Cheryl's comment about a scope and sequence for coaching. Cheryl, I'd be happy to share something with you that I've used in providing professional learning for coaches and all of these strategies over time that includes protocols for the different strategies as well. So I'm happy to share that if that would be helpful for folks. So then we have one last comment in the chat, defining the strategies, then having coaches over time align their strategy to their hypothesis helps them define their system, being transparent about how they provide the support. Great, yes, and that's a really good point, Stacy, just to add, is that typically in those individual coaching cycles, I would suggest that coaches have an idea of strategies up front that they think would best match the implementation issue or best match the need, and then working with a teacher to select from those strategies that might be helpful, instead of just saying, here's the strategy I'm going to use, narrowing it down to ones that you think might help address that concern, and then working with the teacher to establish the strategy that would be used. So as I mentioned, I'm sorry that I did so much talking when we said it would be interactive, but here's my email address if people want to follow up. We also have on the SysUp NERN Active Implementation Hub, we have a coaching series that has some great modules that you can take a look at. And I mentioned I'm happy to stick around a little bit longer for other comments or questions.
Thanks, Tanya. And I do think, any resources you want to send my way, we will put them up on the coaching resource page on SIG Network, and then I'll send out the link to everyone. You all can look it up there so we don't have to clog up people's inboxes.
Sounds good.
And there was a request for your email address one more time.
Great. There it is.
There it is. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being on. I'm hearing a lot about how beneficial it was and outstanding. It's going to be useful for systems and instructional coaching, which I completely agree. We'll have a recording of this, and I'll make it available on the SIG Network homepage as well. You'll receive a message from Len with the recording, but I'll also make it available on the homepage, and then you can send other team members from your states to the recording if they haven't already accessed it. But thank you, Tanya, for spending your time with us when you're just getting back into things, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Jennifer, and thank you all for your participation and your great comments, both in the chat and for those of you who unmuted. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.